think it did. But you did start.
Did you know that you will receive this?
Very nice event.
So, as soon as my mic is on, I guess. All right, are we getting, yes, my mic is on, and we're on. And I can already see that our time is running, so I will try to keep us on time, nevertheless. Welcome to the last panel with this very exciting title about like a possible new northern enlargement. So there has been like some movement there 10 years ago, and then it stopped in Iceland, and now this new geopolitical situation is of course changing or making people rethink at least. We saw some interesting movement in the polls in Norway last year. Then we saw some backwards movement in the polls again in Norway. So, but Pernille will get to all that. And I would say that in this Nordic context, it's also always very interesting how the Nordic cooperation and EU integration have sort of interacted with each other, and sometimes the Nordic region has been sort of ahead of the EU integration. For example, the Nordic countries enabled free movement decades before Schengen was established already, and there has often been this kind of dynamic that the Nordics planned to do something together, but then the EU took that step, and then it became sort of that happened, for example, with the customs union was one of those things that then didn't happen among the Nordic countries and so on. So there's been different parts where the Nordic cooperation has proceeded faster than the EU integration, and then other times it has become sort of unnecessary because it was already done on the EU level. And of course, Norway and Iceland are both very sort of aligned with the EU anyways, even though they are not members. And like I find it very fascinating. Especially this Norwegian, sorry that I'm picking on Norway now, but this vehemence that Norway is willing to pay into the budget but refuses to have a say. So it's an interesting policy. But I will actually, just off topic, start with some very, very exciting and happy news, namely that our first speaker, Guðni, has just received like some hour ago, the Order of the Cross of Terra Mariana First Class as a great friend of Estonia. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. So, as you are a great friend of Estonia, and we're here in Estonia speaking about also a possible EU enlargement that would obviously bring those two countries even closer together, although we have these multiple cooperation formats, such as the NB8. I got this very nice pin yesterday for the Nordic Baltic 8 cooperation. How does it look in Iceland? So it looks like Iceland is really planning to take some steps now to sort of hash up again the EU accession process. So if you could just like give us sort of what is exactly the status quo right now, because Iceland got started with the process after the financial crisis, but then sort of froze the process in 2015, but never completely sort of dropped out of it formally. So it's a very interesting case where it seems like Iceland could just like sort of rekindle this process. But how does it look? Is the population on board? What are the opinion polls showing? And does the government already have a plan for a referendum?
Yeah, many questions, few answers. First of all, I'm of course extremely grateful and honored to have received this award, or this Order of Merit from the Estonian president, and grateful for the invitation here. But you asked about Iceland and the EU application or application. Is it an application? Is it a dormant application? Do you have to renew the application? This is a complex factor as well. The opinion polls indicate that the people of Iceland are divided on the issue, both on whether to actually apply and ultimately whether to join. It's almost evenly split. There is a coalition in power now that took over in 2024, and it has on its agenda to ask the people of Iceland whether they would be willing to apply for membership of the EU. So that is a first step. According to the timetable, a proposal or a motion will be put before Parliament this spring. And then after that, possibly a referendum on whether to join. And then the issue gets complex. You have to, if Iceland were to seek membership of the European Union, you need a constitutional change. And for the constitution to be changed, you need agreement in Parliament and then dissolution of Parliament, elections, and the new Parliament has to ratify the constitutional changes. I remember when I was in office, I said it's more difficult to change the 10 amendments, the 10 commitments than the commandments than the Constitution of Iceland. So everything remains to be seen, and we will just have to see. I'm a historian by profession, and I have a folder on my laptop, future predictions that failed miserably. So I will stay silent on predictions.
Fair enough. So yeah, I had hoped to get some kind of an assessment how likely that the accession of Iceland would be before 2030, but I take it that you will refuse any such.
Ask the Norwegians first, and then I'll refuse.
We can get back to that. So Pernille, as I mentioned, there was it seemed that there was this kind of Trump-induced movement in the Norwegian opinion polls. Norway, of course, has a long history with referendums on the EU question. To have so far gotten the negative answer from the population, and the question is therefore politically not very attractive to basically any government. And I totally understand that, because it was exactly the same in the Finnish and Swedish context, basically with the NATO accession. You had no points to win with it until all of a sudden people wanted that it happened yesterday. So public opinion is fickle, but what is the situation now? Because I think it pedaled back and forth a little bit, the opinion, and at least people seem to express a willingness to have more of an informed debate about the EU. So has some kind of a debate taken place, or is it taking place?
Not so much, I'm afraid, but let me start by answering your question directly, and maybe also explain why the numbers move a bit up and down, and maybe what is needed for having a change. So if we look at the current situation in Norway, there is still a clear majority against membership. And this has been the case since 1994. So the support for membership, as you mentioned, it increased somewhat after the initial Trump shock last year. But then again, that increase did not hold. So already in the autumn, it went back down again. And while the most recent polls now early in 2026 showed a renewed increase in the yes camp after the Greenland issue and kind of this very turbulent start of the year, the no side is still ahead in the polls. It's actually around, now I think the last poll was 50% no. So what we are observing is perhaps increased volatility, but not really a shift. And we saw something similar also after the Russian invasion. So the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 22, in the months that followed, several polls showed the movement in Norwegian EU opinion. And some survey support of the EU membership rose to levels that hadn't been seen before. And that would mean kind of around 35% or something, between 35 and 38. There are a lot of variations in the different opinion polls. But the most striking change was rather a sharp increase in the share of respondents answering don't know. So, which has varied between 13 and 28%, and that was around maybe 28% at that time. So, of course, geopolitical uncertainty has a certain impact, but instead of producing really a stable shift towards positive attitude towards membership, this primarily triggers some sort of reconsideration. So, as you said, people became more uncertain, perhaps more open and more attentive, and also, but not decisively pro-membership. So rather when the immediate kind of sense of crisis fades, support tend to fall back again to kind of the stable patterns. But while the support for membership has not increased much, there is a clear majority of the population that welcome a debate and also even express openness for a referendum at some point. So there is some kind of willingness to discuss it at least. But the majority is still against membership. And I could also try to explain, to say a little bit of why this is the case. If you want me to continue, I can take a second.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So in my view, I mean, this recurrent pattern can only be understood if we take seriously the institutional, political, and economic context in which the Norwegian EU opinion is formed. So since the referendum in 1994, EU membership has become what we may refer to as an avoided issue. We don't talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. It's kind of the trauma of the 1994 referendum that still kind of is very much present. So in Norway, EU integration is still seen through the 1990 lens in a way. It's seen as a market project rather than a strategic one. And this issue avoidance has been possible due to Norway being so deeply integrated into the EU, through the EEA agreement, through Schengen, and as many as 102 sectoral agreements that we have on nearly all policy areas. So this means that for many citizens, Norway already enjoys most of the benefits of EU membership without what in Norway is seen as the political costs of full membership, or not having a voting right.
That's for sure one way to frame
which is strange, of course. So the price we pay for this is, of course, a huge democratic deficit, but the argument does not seem to be sufficient enough for the population. So all this creates some form of institutional lock-in, where even dramatic changes in geopolitical environment produce only temporary opinion shifts. And if I should try to explain why this is the case, some research has been done on that previously. And we have seen that when there is an increase in unemployment, there is also an increase in pro-EU sentiments. But then the economy in Norway works very well. There is very low unemployment. So solid public finances and long period of economic stability and low level of unemployment seem to function as a psychological and political buffer, in addition to the EEA agreement and all the access to kind of the EU benefits in a way. So it reduces the perceived urgency for institutional change, even as external environment becomes more turbulent. And this contributes to the pattern we observe in the opinion polls. External shocks create attention and uncertainty, but still opinion tends to revert to status quo. But this doesn't really mean that the situation works well, and I think that those who work in the Norwegian government, they feel that this is increasingly becoming more challenging. Because the fact that the EU is now evolving rapidly into a polity where the boundaries between internal market and regulation, security, preparedness, and geoeconomic policy are increasingly blurred. This creates new challenges for Norwegian current model. So the EEA provides deep access into the internal market, but it does not automatically grant access to the EU's newer instruments of defense, health preparedness, and economic security. So until now, we have negotiated additional agreement in specific sectors when needed, But this is becoming increasingly difficult, as many of the new initiatives are overarching, and there is getting more and more difficult to get an agreement or to kind of finalize an agreement with third countries. So these challenges is felt strongly in security and defense. IRIS-2, the secure communication system, this is something that we have struggled to have an agreement on, because it's partly kind of in the internal market, partly outside. So it's difficult. And the same is health for the health union, and also for the economic security instrument. And this is likely to be more and more difficult as the EU advances and have more and more kind of these overarching initiatives to respond to this geopolitical uncertainty that we live in. So so I think that the Norwegian electorate will probably not start supporting Norwegian interest membership before they become convinced that about the benefits of full membership. So it's not enough that the government see that this is challenging for Norwegian interests. The citizens have to understand that. And I think the main challenge is that we have a lack of political leadership. So those politicians that really believe in European integration and believe in Norway being part of the EU, and that is good for Norwegian interests, they are so traumatized by this kind of debate that we had 30 years ago. And it is this issue avoidance and there is a kind of an agreement that we have to wait until the public opinion change, which I think is a very problematic
kind of a chicken and egg problem.
It's a chicken and the egg problem, and I think that the citizens will not change before we have a real crisis where it affects, and I think that is a bit
let me tell you, as a Finn, it's not clever to wait until it's almost too late already.
Exactly,
so
we should learn.
It's better to do these things well on time.
Yeah.
I'm reminded, of a comment by a British statesperson years ago who said, "I'm their leader, I must follow them."
It seems to be very much the case. I find it so interesting because I should think that at least the disadvantages should be pretty clear to Norwegian voters, because your government collapsed over an EU energy market regulation. I think it's unreasonable that your government should, collapse over something that you have no say. But okay, I will let you have a break. Now, Guðni, just to come back to you, how much is this sort of because I feel like at least last time that Iceland initiated the process, it didn't impact Norway much. And I'm wondering whether there this time is any kind of how closely are you both sort of watching each other in terms of what the other is doing? Because at least in the Finnish and Swedish NATO accession case, there was this very clear element in the Swedish debate that Sweden cannot be the only Nordic country outside of NATO, if everybody else is in on this club. So is there some kind of peer pressure case there to be made?
Well, there is such a good relationship between Iceland and Norway. We are such good friends on everything except fish.
Fish. It's always the fish.
Yeah.
Always the fish.
And while I would never suggest that the biggest decision you can make in Norwegian politics and society would be determined by actions in Iceland, that would never be the case. It would certainly impact the debate in Norway if Iceland were to join the EU before Norway. I'm not saying that's likely, or I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but it would certainly have an impact. And having said that, conversely, it would have a more impact in Iceland were Norway to join, because that would, to many people's minds, reduce Iceland's options. Would you want to stay outside the EU with Norway inside? Then you would have, as things stand, Iceland and Liechtenstein in the European Economic Area. And with all due respect to Iceland and Liechtenstein, that might not be such a viable future vision. So I think the question is more how decisions in Norway will impact Iceland, rather than how decisions in Iceland will impact the debate in Norway.
Do you agree, Pernille?
I think that if Iceland decides to join, I think that will impact at least the debate in Norway a little bit. But it depends.
Yeah, but not in a decisive manner.
Maybe not, I don't know. But one thing that, since you mentioned fish, I mean, we could,
Okay.
we could probably then we start thinking about should we negotiate with Iceland inside the EU? Maybe that's not a good. So we should kind of join at the same time, or not having Iceland, because we know how it is to negotiate with Iceland.
All of a sudden, a powerful Iceland with EU backing. Yeah, that would change the game.
Just before I forget it, of course, before we will widen the debate, let me just mention an important factor here that we will certainly touch upon later. Again, I think that until now, until the present era, the EU debate was framed within the parameters of economy, sovereignty, society, but not so much defense. But that is a new angle that we have to look at in more detail.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that was also made by the Estonian foreign minister earlier today, and that was a big difference, for example, between the Finnish and Swedish accession to the EU. That for us it was also a question of security, and that's why we also joined the euro in Finland, because we wanted to have a seat at all the tables. So, so Matti, to come to you, sort of to widen the perspective a little bit, and because we have of course had previous panel discussions about the actual current candidate states. Here we are sort of just pleasantly speculating about possibilities in the future, but. There is, of course, this question, because probably if Iceland is to restart the negotiations, or if Norway decides to make this move, probably not even Hungary would be against it. So there might be a very sort of speedy process for these two countries. And then you have to ask, how does that affect the whole sort of wider enlargement debate and perspective, especially with this question, what about the Western Balkans and of course Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia as well. So how does one sort of square the circle of the geopolitical urgency and technical integrity and the fact that Norway and Iceland are sort of more ready than others maybe?
Indeed, thank you. Since this is the EU, one needs to start with the legal basis, right? And the legal basis here is the Article 49 of the EU Treaty that says every European state that fulfills the criteria can join. And there is no doubt that both Iceland and Norway fall comfortably to this criteria. So, and both of them have in the past applied for the membership, and the process was started then, completed. Fair enough. Now both countries have their well worked in arrangement with in their relationship with the EU in the European Economic Area. Mm-hmm. And it's up to them to tell to which extent they are happy with that. You posed, Minna, you provoked at the beginning, saying you have to follow the rules, but you don't have the say. It's a sovereign decision or sovereign choice about the sovereignty that is there. And for us, for the EU, and although I'm EU official, I'm speaking here in personal capacity. For the EU, this arrangement works well. We have, however, at our regular dialogues and meetings, we have to raise the issue of a backlog of the implementation of all those rules that both Norway and Iceland are obliged to. But we manage. It's not an issue. Now, speaking a bit more geopolitically, I was working in the cabinet of the EU Commissioner for Enlargement in 2009 when Iceland first applied. And we very well all recall the context. Iceland was in the eye of the storm of the financial crisis, and it was still nobody said it out loud that way, but it was a nation that has gotten into trouble seeking not refuge but seeking security, seeking stability. That made sense. Then the storm faded away, and the Icelanders one has to be fair, managed that domestically too. Then the urgency faded away too. Now the geopolitical situation, the global situation, is in a turbulence too, and that forms very much, as far as we see, the background to the reignited debate in Iceland. It was especially visible when earlier this year President Trump made the most vocal statements about Greenland. Immediately in the Icelandic government, some discussions were speeded up too. If that's the case, if that's the background, that one seeks a bit more stability, a stronger framework as EU membership, I'm sure there would be a warm welcome. But it is a sovereign decision, obviously. There is this question about Icelandic the first negotiation period, where 11 negotiating chapters were provisionally closed and all that. And of course, via the EEA arrangement, in much of the policy areas, both Norway and Iceland are pretty well aligned. That would help in a hypothetical accession negotiation situation. The quickest ever EU accession since the start of the application to full membership was that of Finland. To something 2 years and 10 months, something like that. Back then, Norway and Iceland are today more integrated than Finland was back then. That would give you, if there's the will, would give you some possible sort of time framework.
So just a follow-up question on this, like, because we're supposed to also try to think creatively about like this. Other issues related to the enlargement prospects of other countries. Do you think that like this EEA model could somehow be utilized in the accession process of other countries? Like, is this EEA model, does it only work for those who...
For rich countries, yes.
All right. So there goes that creative idea.
If you think of it, indeed, you are... you're obliged to follow the rules. You're obliged to pay into the budget. It is a model for wealthier nations.
Yeah, who don't necessarily need the full membership, yes.
And who can afford staying out of a full membership of sovereignty-related reasons.
Good point. Asa, coming to you and the sort of private business perspective, you recently authored a report that had a very sort of like nice conclusion, and that had also to do more with the actual candidate countries and not this hypothetical two, who are of course like very close to us in Sweden and Finland geographically and otherwise as well. But I really like this conclusion that if the EU grows, Sweden grows. So is this sort of this kind of the more the merrier case, or can there be some growing pains in the process? And like if you sort of think about like those findings from the report that actually was sort of looking at the Western Balkans and the current candidate countries, how would that picture look if it included also, let's say, Norway and Iceland?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Minna. I think if I just may do a little introduction and just say I'm really, really glad to be here today, because I think in this amazing gathering that our three host institutions have put together, I didn't hear the word business even once today. So I'm really glad to be here, and I think that is special thanks to you, Stephen, for making sure that I am here. The way I see it is that, and why is that so important? Because the EU fundamentally is a peace project that was built on the fact that we are going to have economic integration. And the businesses are basically the key actors of any economic integration. And even if we are going more to the defense and security side, you're still going to need the private sector and the private actors in that to build up that defense. So I'm really glad to be here. Now, to our catchy line, if the EU grows, Sweden grows. I'll tell you a bit of a story about that. So it was like this. In 2024, I read an article by the World Economic Forum, and they basically, their bottom line of this article was, is there a business case and an economic case for EU enlargement, and for whom? And so what we did, we did a lot of desk research, and we looked through it, and we saw that there are quite a lot of studies that look at the positive effects of the Big Ten. And we heard a lot of people speaking about that today, a lot of the primary speakers in the first panel as well, including the commissioner. And there's been no doubt about that, joining the EU has been great for the Big Ten. The Big Bang enlargement. Are they called the Big Ten or the EU 10? The EU 10, I think. But what we found was that there were very few studies that looked at what is the impact of EU enlargement on the existing member states. And there was almost no study that looked at what would be the economic impact of EU enlargement on the existing member states, but also simultaneously looking at the candidate countries. So that's what we decided to do. And so we decided to answer the call of the World Economic Forum and publish a couple of studies. And the short answer to their question, is there a business and economic case for EU enlargement? The short answer is yes, there is. So what we did in one of our studies was that we looked at what would happen if we integrate Ukraine, Moldova, and the 5 Western Balkan countries into the single market. That would mean, the way in our methodology, is that we bring down all of the tariffs down to 0, which they are within the single market, and we bring down all the other trade barriers to the same level as we have within the single market. And the trade-induced effects alone meant that the candidate countries would get double-digit growth, up to 17%. Sweden's GDP would see a permanent increase by 0.1%. Okay? The EU 27 GDP would see an increase of 0.3%. Now, I want us to get this into a little bit of perspective, because it sounds little. We're advanced economies. A lot of the economies coming in are not quite there. They're upper middle class, upper middle income economies, as categorized by the World Bank. So, but these small changes may sound very incremental, very marginal, but the fact of the matter is, it's 50 billion euro of permanent increase for the EU. That is a third of what the EU has in its budget for its costs. For Sweden, it's 6.5 billion kroner, and that is about the same amount that we spent on new road infrastructure in 2024. I don't think that's so little. So basically, and because these are smaller economies and we're only looking at the trade-induced effects, these are very conservative calculations. So yes, when the EU grows, Sweden grows.
I like this idea that the Western Balkan enlargement can help Sweden keep up its road infrastructure. It's a very good way of framing this when we're talking about narratives. So if I just may get back to you, Asees, about like this sort of prospect, because of course this is for the current candidate states, and you haven't done any official calculations for this, but of course I'm sure that Sweden and Finland and Denmark would be more than happy to welcome the rest of the Nordics in the EU. We have now sort of gotten very excited about how nice it is to be all together in NATO, and there's all this talk about a new Kalmar Union, which used to be this 16th century state forum where we all were under one crown. So how does that look? Because I've been wondering if you have some kind of an assessment, because we've heard that the Norwegians at least feel like there's no very strong urgency, at least in economic terms, for them to join the union. And I mean, Norway would be a very eligible sort of new member because of the sound state of the Norwegian economy. But is there some kind of sort of other side of the coin for Norway, for example? So would Norway, do you think that it would be definitely a win-win also in the Norwegian and Icelandic case?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if we look at Norwegian membership, for example, of course it would be good for EU and the Sweden. I mean, we're talking about a larger economy that is politically stable. It has strong institutional structures, a strong rule of law. And I take these up because in our project, we did something that I think is also important, and that is that we asked our businesses, we surveyed sent out a survey to about 2,000 of our businesses, and we asked them, what is the most important things for you if you were to step up your engagement in the current candidate countries? And literally, the most important things for them were political stability, the rule of law, and strong institutions. Norway already has that, and so does Iceland. So there's a big sort of advantage in that sense where it comes to our public opinion, our business public opinion. And I think that just generally the public opinion towards a northern enlargement would generally be better within the EU, even if you were not another Nordic country and didn't share a nice long border with Norway. But I think if you look at the real economic impact that could be there, I think we should go back again to the idea of trade and trade-induced impacts. Because the fact of the matter is that because Norway is an EEA country and is within the single market, Norway, Sweden, and the EU are incredibly strong and economic trade and economic partners. 80% of Norwegian exports go to the EU, and this is of both goods and services, and they import 60% of their imports of goods and services come from the EU. And there's about a 10% more or less balance between Sweden and Norway on that side, on the Norwegian side. But the question is that since Norway, like Iceland, is also a part of the single market, where will the added trade-induced effects come from in the kind of calculations that we do when we bring down all the barriers? But the fact of the matter is that there are still remaining barriers. And if I can just break them down, I will do it quite briefly. The thing is that Sweden shares one of the longest borders in Europe with Norway. It's 1,600 kilometers. But our businesses still tell us that it's easier to trade with Germany or Denmark. Okay? Why? because there is extra paperwork, there are different rules, there are different standards, there are border checks, and there are tariffs on some goods. So let's just break those down. Norway is in the single market, but it's not in the customs union, which means it can and it does set its own tariffs. One of those tariffs, for example, is on beef. It's 344%. We're complaining about 25 or 15% from the other side of the Atlantic. 344% on beef products. I mean, it's basically making for any other any competition within Norway, it cannot exist in that area. Norway is also not a part of the customs area, right? And if you're not a part of the customs area, both Norwegian companies exporting out and Swedish companies or European companies importing in, they're going to have different, much more red tape and complex border situations. And this is costly for our businesses and for your businesses. So that's one thing. And then there are also certain differences, for example, in technical standards. For goods, I think there are different standards, for example, for something as important, but maybe quite basic as building materials, which makes it more difficult to certify the products. Whereas if Norway was really within the union, a product certified in Sweden or Germany or even Greece would automatically be certified in Norway and vice versa. And my last point is, I think we shouldn't forget services, because there are also differences in the certification and the authorization processes, which means that you don't have the same kind of the movement of services, which is in some ways also people, is not as easy. So using our applied methodology, all of these barriers of trade would disappear if Norway would become a full member. And that trade and investment, because we're already geographically close and do trade a lot, would mean an economic effect, a positive effect, also for Norway, but definitely for us. If I could just say one thing, there is another little thing that I do work on. And I've recently, have you heard of this really nice free trade agreement that the EU has concluded negotiations for? The one with India? Remember that? Just imagine if Norway was a part of the EU, that whole market would open up for them. In a way, it really didn't, because I have worked a lot with that agreement, and I can tell you this, it's much better than the one that the EFTA countries have with India.
Well, that gives Norway hopefully something to think about. But then I just want to get back to this question of fish, because it's so interesting. So we sort of, Asees and I sort of came to the conclusion that it would be also better for the fish to not have customs and tariffs and so on. What is it like? Why is there such an emotional reaction to fish? I mean, we have these issues also with the UK. With France raising it over the strategic partnership, and then like you mentioned it, Guðni, that it's like the only thing like you don't see eye to eye with Norway on. And I found it very interesting that a year ago, when there was a little bit more discussion about the EU perspective in Norwegian media, for example, there was a fish lobbyist who said that in their perspective, it would actually be great to be a member of the EU, because that would mean better access for the fish, the Norwegian fish. So, like, how can we overcome this fish issue?
Well, I am a historian by profession, and in 1972, fish did have an impact on the Norwegian decision, or the ultimate result of the referendum. At that stage, Iceland had just extended its fishing limits to 50 nautical miles, leading to a cod war with Britain.
Oh, yeah.
And at the same time, the Norwegians were making up their minds whether to join the common market. And there was a sizable body of opinion in Norway saying we should not do that. We should do what Iceland is doing, extend our own fishing limits and not let the foreigners in. So that in a tiny way demonstrated that decisions in Iceland can influence opinions in Norway. But fish is not only a practical economical issue about access to markets, at least in Iceland. It is an emotional issue as well. And I think, you have demonstrated so clearly 0.1% access with India. All this matters economically, but people make up their minds with more than their wallet and their decisions on whether they will be able to buy more stuff from India or sell more stuff to Norway or Sweden or have better roads in Sweden or whatever. It is an emotional, sentimental issue when you really make up your mind. Do you want to join a supranational body or not? At least that is the case in Iceland. And people in Iceland, especially the older generation, will say, we did not fight the court wars only to let those bloody foreigners in again. So that is a sentiment you have to overcome. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, like I said, especially when you seem to have, I could have echoed or repeated so much of what you said about the feeling in Iceland that we have so many of the positive advantages of access to Europe. We have the 4 freedoms. We have everything we want through the European Economic Area. That is a sentiment that is very practical in Iceland. But and like you mentioned, Matti, like when is the right time to join a body like the EU? Is it when the economy is going strong? Then people will say, well, we're doing fine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If the economy is in a downturn, well, this is definitely not the right moment to make fundamental decisions like this. And that was certainly the case in 2009 afterwards, where Iceland, yes, most certainly decided to apply, but ultimately interest faded. Just to conclude, and with a fish story as well, there was a captain once in Iceland. He went out to sea in harsh weather, and it only got worse. And the crew feared for its life. And ultimately, the captain said, "Dear God, if you help us out, I will donate all the proceeds of this trip to the church." And they made it to harbor. And the crew remanded the captain, and he said, I was only joking. When the situation becomes easier, then
you want to keep your fish.
Then you want to keep your fish.
So, Matti, you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah. I'd like to bring fish and security policy together, at least a bit. I am doubtful that the economic argument would win in this discussion. In your countries, obviously, it's your countries and your decisions and your discussions, but economic argument, I don't think will win the day.
Yeah, I was.
The willingness strive to belong to something bigger in turbulent seas might, and that's good to bear in mind. There is more in our relationship than just the EEA and the economic part of it. We are very like-minded on the Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, and we as the EU, we appreciate very highly the support that both Norway and Iceland have given and are giving to Ukraine. One part of this support is also alignment with the EU sanctions, right? And this is not an entirely straightforward issue for, say, Norway, where last year there were differences of opinion between different ministries, even the same government, on whether to impose sanctions on some Russian fishing companies in the Barents Sea. So it got their economy and security policy are very much intertwined. Take it one step further. Imagine a situation of a major trade war where the EU is party of. Then there is the question. And I know because I've been asked by both Norwegian and Icelandic diplomats and politicians, should that be the case, what about us? Will you remind, will you bear us in mind? We haven't seen this trade war, hopefully will not. But the question is very real. And then one does not want to get caught in between. And that's the risk one needs to bear when one is outside, politically, even if one is inside economically.
Yeah.
There is a, sorry, I'll get to you, Pernille, just in a second, but there is a very interesting aspect to this with this Greenland crisis, because first of all, Denmark was, of course, like less easy to blackmail economically thanks to the EU membership. And then there was also this element that although Greenland is not part of the EU, but Denmark is, so you did see the leaders of the big EU countries like Macron and Merz and others make quite strong statements and like really like seriously commit to standing with them behind Denmark. And there is, of course, like this question, like maybe that would be the case if Trump discovers Svalbard next, but we don't know. So it's sort of this question, like, do you want to chance it in that way? But Pernille.
I think that will definitely change the debate in Norway if Svalbard is on the agenda, because that will be that kind of crisis where you kind of it hits at home and closer to Norway. But I totally agree with you. Now, when I talked about I more tried to explain why there is no opinion shift in Norway. And of course, you are totally right that the security, it's much more about security. I mean, and especially if we have a trade war, the problem for Norway is that we have the EEA agreement, but we are not in the customs union. And we have already had a problem recently, or kind of where we saw this. How can we be on the inside of kind of how do you call it, these preventive measures concerning the Faroe Islands and all that. That was rather recently. So this is a very, I mean, all of those who know this issue well of Norway-EU relation knows that. But unfortunately, the population do not really understand these things. At least they are not into all the details, and that's why I think that even though you have these very turbulent times where transatlantic relation is in changing, and you are not certain about the American security guarantees, people in Norway still think that, well, this is just a phase, it will come back. So it's not.
And it might.
And it might, yeah, it might, but it also maybe not. So, so the thing is that if something were to happen with Svalbard and Trump gets interested in Svalbard, then I think that we will have a different debate in Norway. But the main problem is that we are not discussing these things in Norway. It doesn't help that I and others who know this are writing articles all the time that the EU is a security actor important for Norwegian security. There is no longer kind of, you cannot, there is not a problem to be both in the EU and in NATO, for instance. Of course, like Sweden and Finland and most other EU countries. But this is not really kind of getting, I mean, support in the debate. That there is still this fear that the EU will replace NATO. I mean, we have a debate in Norway about EU, which is completely off what is going on in the rest of Europe. And this is because we are not part of the political debate. So it's just limited to a few of us. And that I think is the problem.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Minna, can I go back to the fish?
Yes, we have to solve this issue.
Yeah, so I maybe I don't want to take your job right now or your role, but I have kind of a question, because when Norway and Iceland are not in the customs area, what do your businesses say? Because the fact of the matter is that they do get easier access and more access to world markets, but also easier access to the single market. And we're talking about, fish, fresh fish, hopefully. And you don't want to have a lot of border checks that take a long time, and you don't want to have a lot of veterinary checks that you have to have today. So what does your industry say? I mean, the fisherman who still wanted to keep his economic power.
Well, I am no expert here.
He wanted to keep his fish because he wanted to make his money.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, I'm sure somebody could correct me, especially if there's somebody from Iceland in the audience. But yes, Ingólfur, there you are. Help me out here if I say something outrageously stupid. But I tend to believe or think that through the European Economic Area Agreement, Icelandic industries, he's nodding, are more or less okay with the situation to the internal market as things stand. So the EEA gives us a way in without being on the inside. So we're doing okay in that regard. Where the EU, however, to say, well, this European Economic Area has to come to an end. It is not viable for us. Then there would the whole situation would drastically change. But as things are, you have the 4 freedoms. You have access to the inner market, and the fish companies seem to be content.
Okay, it's just a question. I mean, this is really a decision of the Norwegian people and the Icelandic people. And let's be very clear, I think from the business perspective for us, it's just let's then do whatever we can within what we have to bring the barriers down as much as possible.
But I just want to mention, I don't think that fish, and not even agriculture, is the main problem. For Norwegian access is much more, as you said, it's much more emotional. Yes. It hasn't really something to do with that. If it was that easy,
it more sovereignty.
Yeah, it's more about sovereignty and having this kind of self-control and this the EU is to some extent misunderstood, looked upon as a supranational body taking the decisions, and which is it's a bit paradox, because now we are in the EEA, we have these 102 agreements, we are in Schengen, but we have no say in all the directives that we kind of take into our legal system. And even though we have a huge backlog, I know, but I mean, I'm not representing the government, so there are others here talk for that. But so I think it's important to say that fish and agriculture, yes, it's there in the debate, especially agriculture, not so much the fish any longer for Norway. But I think it is completely marginal. It has to do with something else. It has to do the fact to be member of a union that you don't really understand. The decision will be taken in Brussels, which they already are, but there is this emotional feeling that it has to do with that and not...
Maybe it has to be reframed as like a sovereignty gain, that Norway gets to at least sit at the table in Brussels where these decisions are being taken. I want to make sure that we have time for questions as well. I'm going to just pose one question that I would like you to respond to if you feel like it at the very end, and it's my little idea that Norway could do a really funny thing, like a really huge move in support of Ukraine by deciding to join the EU and tying its accession to EU, the same enlargement round as Ukraine, because then it would all of a sudden make it much harder for Hungary to block this enlargement round. So this is just like a little idea that I'm happy to hear your opinions on whether that might move the discussion in Norway as well. But I see here already 3 questions. We start right here in front.
Thank you. Mart Kulkep, University College London. I find it interesting how we think of the Northern enlargement in these psychological terms. It's about the trauma of the failed referendum, it's about the emotional fish, it's about sort of the storm raging outside, and then we huddle around the EU membership application as if it's some kind of a campfire. And this relates to sort of what Minna was just saying. what would be the psychological effect of the northern enlargement actually taking place? How would this influence these other enlargements that we have been talking about, and how would it influence this enlargement skeptic opinion that we can see to an extent in countries like Estonia? Would, the impression be that if enlargement is good enough for Iceland and Norway, maybe it's good enough for us? Just wondering what you think.
Let's take the other two questions as well at the same time, and yes.
Thank you. I think both the Norwegian and Icelandic cases are really interesting because there's a huge paradox. And the paradox is two countries stay out of the EU on sovereignty grounds. But actually it's all organized hypocrisy because both countries actually, in the practice of sovereignty, give up much more than a member state. They actually bring into their domestic systems laws over which they have, at best, limited wriggle room and very little influence. But for the public, this is never explained, and that's why I call it, and organized hypocrisy is part of politics, so I'm not making a normative judgment on it. But there is this huge juxtaposition between, on the one hand, staying out because it gives us more control, but then EEA, well, we take all these directives and regulations and incorporate them, and we get our judicial system to enforce them. So in the practice of sovereignty, there's a loss for both states. In fact, a greater loss than a member state. And it's always puzzled me why in the domestic debates, this aspect of it is never clear. At least I know Norway better than Iceland.
Just a quick comment on that. Yes, you're right, but you're not in politics in Iceland.
Or Norway.
I remember when I was in office, there was still the same backlog that is now, and I would sign EEA agreements that were passed in Brussels 5 years before. And I would say, what would happen if I were not to sign? And the official would say, you better not ask that question. So yes, you're right, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I could just say the same for Norway.
No, but actually, I had a similar question like Bridget, because we were in the previous panel we were talking about the costs of non-enlargement. So maybe in the debate, you should more speak about the costs of non-accession. And I was wondering whether there are any costs that, or any example that you could give of a cost of this organized hypocrisy that Bridget was actually referring to. So is there any example that you could name? I mean, Minna was mentioning that, there was a collapse of a government over an EU regulation that they were not part of taking the decision on. So is there any other cost example that you could give, and that basically then would also be able to be communicated to the public? Because otherwise I would say, and we were talking over lunch on that question, maybe the model that as it is currently is so successful that there is no need actually for the accession in the end. So, what is the cost of non-accession, maybe, to put it there?
Thank you. Excellent questions. I would suggest that we start actually with Matti and ask us for at this question of a possible psychological effect on the enlargement skeptical opinion within the EU. So how big a sort of push would it be, do you think, if Norway and Iceland, or would it then just make it more difficult, because then it would seem unfair that they just got to come in whenever they so decided, and the others have been waiting for so long? What do you think?
I don't think the last matter that you mentioned would feature in, because that is easily explicable.
Yeah.
They would get in quicker because they are already aligned in so many areas. I think it would have a fairly positive effect The thing is, well, I don't have the full data, obviously, but it should be fairly easy to check. Normally, the countries who want to join the EU and who are joining the EU are poorer than the existing average. Maybe in the first enlargement wave, but even then, in the 1970s, Britain was not that well off, not to speak of Ireland. The Nordics, beginning of the 90s, maybe yes, but if a well-established, wealthy Western European country or two would want to join for a change, I think that would shape some opinion for sure. Would have a very positive.
I'm wondering, like, if you also know anything about, for example, because the agricultural lobby is, of course, always sort of like never very enthusiastic about EU enlargement usually, and I'm actually surprised that we haven't mentioned the common agricultural policy at all today here. I guess maybe nobody wants to talk about it, but like, is that maybe something that would be somehow affected? If you know anything.
Well, I have to admit, I'm not an expert on the CAP, but I mean, if Norway has, for example, very high tariffs and a lot of protectionism around its agriculture goods, it's of course, I mean, when they bring, if they would join the EU, you would bring down the protectionism, there would be more competition, but then you would also probably have access to CAP and also have a say in how CAP is formed. I think from a Nordic perspective, having a greater Nordic unity in the EU will definitely make for a much better single market and a much more efficient EU. So I think from that perspective, it would be good. How the lobbyists in the agricultural lobby in France will react, I think it's better not to talk about that. But I think I would just like to allude to your comment. I think the fact that you're a rule taker and not a rule maker is an enormous democratic deficit. And it would be interesting to hear a little more on how that deficit is considered and where it comes to the economic costs. I mean, the thing is that the more open markets we can create within our EU, I mean, the more market dynamism we will have, the more innovation we will have, even in your countries, and the more competitive we will become.
So, Pernille and Guðni, would you like to tackle the other questions, especially this sort of like question about framing and the costs?
Yeah, the cost. Should I start?
You go ahead.
Yeah. Of course, I think it's a good idea to try to focus on the cost of membership, and this is what many of us do in our op-eds, and I have had several op-eds in Norwegian press. Talking about security, that there actually is a security risk not to be part of the EU, and that NATO is not enough, especially now that we have a lot of other security issues, not only territorial defense, but also because with the transatlantic relations being so unpredictable, and most of the European allies are in the EU and in NATO, and you will maybe have a Europeanization of NATO at some point. Of course, this will create a lot of challenges for Norway. But it doesn't really seem to kind of get the debate going. And I think that the main thing is also that the government, I mean, the collapsing government was not really a crisis in Norway. I mean, it was a center party going out of the government, and then you had a minority government, and the Labour Party was, well, it was a minority government, but it was maybe easier for them to, so they actually thrived on that for half a year until the election, and then the election they continued in government, in a minority government still, and also with no majority in the parliament. And right now, with the parliament we have now, there is no majority in the parliament either for EU membership. So that is also something that we have had before. We have had the majority in the parliament, but not in the opinion polls. So the collapse of government is not really seen as a crisis. So I think it is the security argument that will kick in at some point. but still it is not really felt. So I think that is kind of the main problem. When it comes to enlargement, I don't know if I understood your question correctly, but if Norway and Iceland were to join, I think that, I mean, the Norwegian population has always been very positive towards enlargement of the EU. And I don't know if that will change once we're in the EU, but there is a paradox, because the Norwegian government is working very hard to assist all candidate countries to, to be members. But then not kind of so much for Norway. But it has to do with the opinion and not so much about often the government. And of course the government until now we have a minority government with the Labour Party, which is mainly for membership. But of course we have, until recently, we have had coalition government, and there has always been this suicide kind of a paragraph that, because there's always been one party against membership. So the government has never kind of had this on the agenda either. So I think that's the
It's like enlargement for thee, but not for me, basically.
Yeah, it's that. But it's also one thing that the Prime Minister is repeating over and over again. We need to make sure that the EEA agreement kind of to save that. Yeah. And that is the economic argument, because this is so important for Norwegian businesses and Norwegian economy, and it has served Norway well. And this is, I mean, his project is to not rock the boat, so that will kind of, because that will be critical for Norway. And then it's better to have this, be this rule taker, and to have the EEA agreement and over 102 plus maybe soon agreements, instead of maybe kind of losing the, and of course we will be afraid what will happen to the EEA agreement if Iceland joins, or maybe you will have the same problem if we will join. But I think it's more probably that you will enter before us.
So Guðni, you get to like start the last round with responding to the questions, and then I hope that like if somebody has any opinions on my idea about Norwegian-Ukrainian EU accession, so happy to hear those.
Well, it all boils down to the fact that whether to join the European Union or not is the biggest decision a nation can make, in my opinion. And it will never be decided upon on economic merit only. We have had this debate in Iceland after the banking crisis, a traumatizing event in Iceland. And it remains to be seen whether the new securities environment calls for a rapid transformation of Icelandic cost loss analysis of EU takes place. But we can be certain that the question cannot be framed only in economic terms, and hitherto sovereignty has been sort of uppermost in Icelandic minds. But I wouldn't be surprised if security considerations were to take greater space. Iceland is a founding member of NATO. From 1951, we have had a defense agreement with the United States that is still in force. But from 1951 to 2006, there was a US military base on the island. It's no longer there. And with the latest uproar in the Arctic, when President Trump even alluded to taking Greenland somehow, the question immediately arose in Iceland: would the military base in Iceland be a part of that? So how are you going to stand on that? So we have entered a new period. Possibly a throwback to the 19th century world of strong men and big powers and the might of the strong, and international law does not apply to me, etc., etc. And that is certainly a cause of concern when you don't have an army and you're an island in the middle of the North Atlantic. So it remains to be seen how we will tackle that question.
Okay, very brief final remarks from the rest. Yeah, Pernille.
Okay, I'm just to comment on that the EU is the biggest decision that a country can take. Actually, I'm not so sure that I fully agree, because we are so integrated already. So actually taking the decision shouldn't be that big of a question. And I think that's the problem, that is framed that way in both Iceland and Norway, that this is such a big decision. Because we are already, I mean, it has nothing to do with sovereignty, because we have already lost our sovereignty through the EA agreement. So I think that this has to be framed in a different way. It has to be framed in a way that we need to be part of the political debate, discussions, decisions on how to develop the European politics and European continent. And that the EU is more about an additional kind of governing level rather than entering something completely new. We are already in it. So it's just kind of to have access to the decision making. So I think that is how it should be framed, and I think that's the problem, actually, that we are not talking about it in that way. We can have different opinions about different policy areas, and we should debate that in the EU, but being member or not, should be the least kind of difficult question in my view. But
and you're not in politics.
No, I'm glad I'm not. And when it comes to Ukraine, I mean, it's an interesting suggestion, but I cannot really see it happening. But you never know.
Being a European citizen, being inside the EU, Guðni is right. It is the biggest decision, because the EU membership, even if you are part of single market, the EU membership profoundly changes your society in almost all of the aspects. And
hasn't it already happened?
And that's a good start for a domestic discussion. Also, I maintain that this discussion hardly in your wealthy countries be one on economic argument. Maybe we gain some more, as opposed to maybe we want to belong somewhere for real. And this kind of, if it's the biggest decision for your society, then it can only be won by passion. By passionate arguments, and not about maybe we gain some more, or maybe we sit at one table more. That will not do. In the final week before the Brexit referendum, the editorial of the Times newspaper that was pro-EU, pro-Remain, said, with all the flaws, we still think that it's safer to stay in, whereas the no camp was passionately making the argument of getting sovereignty back. We all know who won. And that's, if I can give some advice on the domestic debate, that would be that one. Thanks.
Yeah. You have the last word.
Thank you. I'm not sure the business argument is the one that will win the passion or the hearts of minds. But I think it's a really important supporting argument, because the fact of the matter is that when we are talking about the big players in the world, Guðni, you mentioned them, you're actually talking about the big economic powers. And I think if Europe is going to become an economic powerhouse, it does need to grow. It does need to become more competitive. It does need to join hands and forces as much as it can, because ultimately that economic strength is also a part of our defense and our security.
Excellent. Like, no better words to end this panel. Thank you so much.
I think you will never have a passionate. Thank you.
seats here.
We're in the same boat, you know. Pulling ourselves all the way.
I don't see if there's anybody still in the hall. But yeah, there's a lot of you. Hello. Yes. We are reaching the end of the meeting. As you see on the screens also, we are still to hear the greetings by the current EU presidency. This is something that we have not been discussed, the everyday life of the EU for the member states, but we will go there. And I just take a moment to first thank you, everybody, on behalf of the Estonian Foreign Ministry. Thanks for coming here. Thanks for staying. We have had very good discussions, a lot of food for thought. So I guess we are well fed, and I am not going to add to that so much, so we can start digesting what we have been hearing here. But I think we all got our some lines. I have been noting down a lot of things that have been interesting, a lot of some ideas and thoughts and a to-do list, actually. And if we look at the question that was posed, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I don't know, we haven't been discussing any patterns or movement, but this actually, I think, implies a little bit to us being slow or really not moving fast enough with the enlargement. And we need to move quicker, and this is, I think, quite clear to everybody. But then also, there are different difficulties that we are facing in this moving. So I don't think we have exactly found the silver bullet to get out of this, become speedier. But also now we have to move forward, and we have to probably ask some questions of ourselves. Are we actually at the point of no return with the enlargement? Or have we created a methodology that keeps us from enlargement? So where are we exactly? And if it's the latter, then how do we get creative and get past this situation that we have? So why do we actually enlarge? What is the cost of non-enlargement? All of these questions to be posed to ourselves. So, as I already said, the extraordinary times need extraordinary solutions, and there is no plan B for Europe. And we have also heard, and I hope we believe all of us in that the enlargement is not an act of benevolence. It's actually something that is useful for us and also for, of course, the applicant countries. The to-do list is probably there is a longer one, and maybe some of you have like a more advanced one, but I realize that definitely the important things we need to do, we have to get better at communicating, definitely. Inside of our own countries, helping the candidate countries, but the most important thing now is to change the narrative, because the narrative is something that we have not got right. And there are things that we have heard today that would actually help us to change the narrative. We have heard that how different the reasons for countries wishing to become members of the EU can be, and that they have changed over the time. Then also that it can be very useful for our current businesses that to get new countries in and more business going. And then also we have heard that it's not the case that all the people in the candidate countries wish their countries to become members of the EU just to get more money. They want to have more rule of law. They want to have clearer rules. They actually want to live better lives. So these are the arguments. But then most of all, really to to get out of this understanding that we are doing this for candidate countries because we are just so good, to develop the narrative that, and I believe it is true, that we are doing it for ourselves. We want Europe to be stable, secure, prosperous, more stable, more secure, and more prosperous. And for that reason, we are working with the candidate countries. We are assisting the candidate countries to become better in the fields where they need our assistance and where they need to become better. And then these countries join, and we have a bigger, more stable, more secure, more prosperous Europe. So this would be the aim. I think it's a good aim. So I hope to see you all in a year's time, but I don't think we can actually sit and wait and then come back to the questions that we are posing today, but we need to act in between. With that, the word goes to the Minister of European Affairs of Cyprus, Ms. Raouna. I hope to see her on the screen.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join you today, even if only virtually, from Nicosia, from the European Union's southeastern-most corner. Cyprus and Estonia stand thousands of miles apart. And yet, despite the geographical distance, we are partners within the European Union that have in common much more than meets the eye. Two member states that understand well from lived experience the importance of upholding international legality, territorial integrity, and sovereignty, that understand from lived experience what lack of security means in practice. Cyprus and Estonia embody all that the Union encapsulates, a political project that transcends geography, that is about solidarity, shared principles, mutual cooperation, and collective responsibility. Cyprus assumed the presidency of the Council on the 1st of January with immense pride and a deep sense of responsibility, determined to deliver results. In this context, I wish to thank the organizers, the International Center for Defense and Security at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for inviting me to today's event and for offering this valuable opportunity for joint reflection on the EU's most transformative policy and a key priority of the Cyprus presidency: enlargement. Ladies and gentlemen, the motto of our presidency is a union that is more autonomous and open to the world, an independent union, a union that engages with the world from a position of internal strength and confidence. Enlargement lies at the heart of this effort, and it is no coincidence that President Christodoulidis' tour ahead of our presidency started with the Western Balkans and other enlargement countries. Enlargement has proven time and again that it is our most successful foreign policy tool, an enabler of security, stability, and prosperity. At its core, enlargement is about the European model being one that countries aspire to join, the most vibrant proof that the Union continues to inspire, and a political project to which aspiring states undergo immense and arduous efforts and reform to join. Because ultimately, the EU is the greatest place to live and belong. In the midst of geoeconomical and geopolitical shift, of unpredictability, the EU remains a predictable, stable, and trustworthy partner, committed to international rules-based order and multilateralism. From Ukraine and Moldova to the Western Balkans and Turkey, enlargement is far beyond about completing a map. It is about completing a vision of a reunified Europe firmly anchored in peace, democracy, and stability. As a process firmly grounded in merit, enlargement aims to bring our future member states closer to our union of values. Russia's invasion and ongoing aggression against Ukraine has changed Europe. We're not only witnessing a war on European soil, but our attack on our shared values and our security system. This aggression has compelled us to rediscover our original purpose as a union, and enlargement lies at the heart of this vision. And at this critical juncture, we cannot afford to lose the renewed momentum of enlargement. Yes, there is momentum, but it is not open-ended, and we need to make it credible. And that means that where our partners deliver, we deliver as a union. Focus on conditionality and on merits, and with an eye on the big picture of what is at stake. Only this past Friday, my counterpart from Montenegro was in Cyprus. Montenegro is a front-runner, demonstrating how sustained reforms and political commitment deliver results. Just 3 weeks into our presidency, we convened an IGC with Montenegro to mark the closing of another negotiating chapter, bringing the total to 13. In a few months, we aim, by the end of our presidency, to close another 7 chapters, and it is a priority to set up the ad hoc working party on the Accession Treaty. Albania has likewise shown strong reform commitment with rapid progress in negotiation. Building on 7 IGCs to date, we aim to reach consensus on the IBAR for Cluster 1 and provisionally close several chapters during our semester. Ukraine and Moldova have shown remarkable determination since the opening of negotiations. Ukraine continues to advance reforms despite the immense strain of being a country at war while negotiating. Moldova remains firmly anchored to its reform agenda, pushing ahead with determination and courage despite the hybrid threats and external pressures. We are committed to moving the accession process for both countries forward. Next month, we will host an informal meeting of EU ministers for European affairs in Nicosia, with EU enlargement as a central agenda item with the participation of candidate countries. In addition, separate informal meetings of EU ministers with Ukraine and Moldova respectively will take place to reflect on the next steps. Mindful of ongoing challenges and possible setbacks, we will try to explore avenues for further progress for Serbia's accession process, as well as for Bosnia-Herzegovina and North Macedonia, subject to established conditionality. And we still believe that for Turkey, that remains a candidate country, the most effective path for engagement is accession negotiations and the conditionality that lies within that framework. Ladies and gentlemen, the path to accession is exceptionally demanding, requiring political courage that often comes at a cost, but it needs to be matched by determination that is unquestionably a cost worth bearing. Because above all, this path is a promise of security, stability, and prosperity. The 1st of May 2004, the day that Cyprus joined, was the greatest historical moment for my country since independence and for the 9 other member states. It was an overwhelming moment of hope and opportunity, and that promise has held true. EU accession has transformed Cyprus. It has brought prosperity and safety, and it still continues. And as one of the smaller member states at the EU's periphery, as a member state that is still under occupation by Turkey, we know what it means to place your future within the European family. Drawing on our own journey, we are committed to turn the promise of enlargement into tangible progress, to work as presidency as true honest brokers with all partners, institutions, member states, as well as candidate countries, to sustain the momentum and to achieve results. For too long, if we are to be honest, we made promises that we fell short of delivering. The current momentum is real, but it can be fleeting. We must seize it and deliver. Because enlargement is not just about new member states joining the Union. It is about renewing the Union itself, its purpose, its ambition, its soul, its promise. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I would like to go back to fish. No, I'm kidding. I'm well aware that I am the last obstacle between what has been an extremely successful EU Enlargement Conference and a nice, bright, I think at the moment, last time I checked, Friday evening and a glass of wine. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. In my capacity as ambassador of Cyprus, the country holding the rotating presidency of the European Union, to Estonia, to say a few words, and I'll be very brief. I would like to make 3 points. First one, of course, is to thank and congratulate the organizers for delivering this unique conference. It's now firmly marked on everybody's calendar when it comes to EU enlargement. And I think everybody involved deserves a hand of applause, starting from Stephen, Helga, and their team as ICDS, the Foreign Ministry, Estonian Foreign Ministry, the Commission, and of course my good Swedish colleague, I can't see because of the light, for her contribution and her embassy's contribution. So let's give a hand of applause to all the organizers for this wonderful conference. Then my second point comes from my own experience. I joined the Cyprus Foreign Service in 1999 when Cyprus was a candidate country together with Estonia. My first posting was to Helsinki, covering also Estonia. And two things I remember as the most powerful, perhaps, memories from that first posting. First one, there was a lot of cursing from my side about the weather in November and December. But the second one was how fulfilling an experience it was to work with the Estonian colleagues on this project that was giving hope and optimism to our countries. We knew that it was part of a historical route, but we never realized what a historical moment it would lead to when our countries joined. And we have a duty not to close the door behind us. We need to keep the door to hope and optimism for everybody who wishes to join. And my third and last point is that I would like to invite you all to taste a glass of Cyprus wine or beer outside and celebrate the deliberations that we had today. So once again, thank you very much, and cheers. Let's hope next time we meet we can actually say cheers to an actual enlargement that has happened. Thank you again.